Hello, and welcome to another episode of Program Manager's Guide to Kerbal. Today we're going to look at trying to get to orbit. In the last episode, we had a little trouble getting into above the atmosphere. We made it, we achieved our mission, but we carried back a SRB on the bottom of our capsule because of a malfunctioning decoupler. As a program manager, more than likely we would have had a team meeting, tried to get all our stakeholders involved, talk about the failure before the next mission. We have a limited time before the next mission, so at best what we could do is have quality, our quality asset, go back to the manufacturer, perform an 8D, try to figure out what in the manufacturing process went awry, use that information for the next mission, and if we couldn't figure out what was wrong with the decoupler, a program manager should have the flexibility and ability and the leadership to decide to use a different type of decoupler or a different manufacturer decoupler for the next mission until the quality assessment could be done on the previous failure. One thing we don't want to introduce as program managers is risk. If we mitigate risk, that is our mantra, if you will, but we don't want to introduce it knowingly. I did run a quick mission to get some science, so as you can see our science has changed since last week, and I bought a little bit more rocketry to help us get up into the orbit of Kerbal. Okay, with that said, let's go to our VAB, vertical assembly building, start constructing our new rocket. So this is an orbital flight. We're going to change our flag, and we're going to look for one that kind of looks cool. Something not too pretentious, but something that's just simply mission worthy. So let's go with the circles right now. Once we have that, we're going to have our mission titled. We're going to call this Loki 1. Sole mission is to orbit, which is our parameters to our project. Orbit. Perform science. And return safely. For this mission, we have the Onion and the Command Pod. I won't use the Onion for manned missions. It is less on the mass, but I don't feel it's a great capsule for what we need, and it has a couple lower stats than the MK1, so for the same price I get a little bit better capsule, so we'll use the MK1. I do want to put Commander Becker as the flight operations, so she's going to be in there, and then we'll continue to build our spacecraft. As always, we build from the top down, so we're going to use a parachute, and the MK16 parachute will work nicely for the mission that we're going to try to accomplish. And we're going to try to have another payload, and the payload is done by the service bay, and the service bay will house our science. Now the MK16 parachute will allow the service bay and the weight of the MK to land properly on Kerbal, so we don't have to do any other parachuting or design any other parachute. With that said, let's get some science in the science bay, and we'll do a couple, because we're going to try to land in a different biome while taking some science. So what we'll do is we'll put some multiple science here. Science is worth the cost, so we still want to manage our weight and manage our costs. But if we can put enough science in here to do what we need to do, or perform the science we need to perform, then I would like to do it. Okay, so we have 2 barometers, 3 temperatures, 1 goo. The goo is good for space, not another biome though. All right, with that said, we will go into our procedural heat shield, put that on the bottom. Now we have our return spacecraft ready and able to perform that portion of the mission. And we will start building out the engines. The engines here on this stage, we need a decoupler because we don't want to take the engine back. So we'll get a procedural stack decoupler. All right, and that'll detach our returning spacecraft from our engine set. The more mass we use, the more fuel we're going to need to get to an orbit. However, with liquid fuel, we'll be able to adjust our retrograde to return to orbit, return from orbit at a position on Kerbal that we want. Also, Kerbal is not so realistic in the fact that I'm going to be able to merge pieces, and that's okay. What I'll do is I'll align the piece, and we'll say it's a new piece or an engineered piece specific to the mission. We can move it wherever we want within the 3D plane, and what I'll do is I'll move all 4 of these, kind of merge them into not one, because the weight distribution will be weird, but I'll merge them into a single stack. Now the game mechanics come into play. So what I'll do here is see if we can go ahead and just put on 1 swivel fuel engine, because that'll give us maneuverability. And it doesn't look like I can while the pieces are there. Okay, so what we'll have to do is we'll have to move the pieces out and then attach the engine. So we'll move them out. Go back. All right, so that's a game limitation. And we'll put this right in the center. Boom. And then what we'll do is we'll move these back directly where we had them. And there you go, a new part. We'll have some drag with that new part because if you notice the overlay, if I can get that in just a little bit more, yeah, there we go. That'll give us a little bit better control over the spacecraft. And of course, after that stage, we will definitely need a decoupler. We'll kind of pan out. And that'll give us plenty of fuel to do what we want. That gives us 90 plus or times 5 amount of fuel. So we're good there. And then we will go into our building of the rest of the rocket, which will not be liquid fuel. Liquid fuel is engines are powerful, but we don't have any really good ones yet. As you can see, the Reliant LVT-30 at sea level is only 205, but if you look at our solid fuels, we're at 230 with the SRB, or 197, or even 162. So, and the BACC Thumper is at 250. And the Thumper we might use for boosters on the side, depending on the cost of our spacecraft. Again, we want to keep, as project managers, program managers, we want to keep costs down. We want to do it for the minimum amount we can, but we want to be the safest and we want to achieve our mission. So these thoughts are always in the back of my head, just continuing to evolve. What I'll do is I'll put an SRB for second stage, procedural decoupler, another SRB. Okay, and then what I want to do is use our radial decouplers, since we have access to those from our science. I don't need 4, but I'd like to see what 2 can do for us. So we line these up as best as possible. And let's see if we can... They're single detach points, so we can't really use more than one. Unfortunately, that's a game mechanic. What I don't want is... I want these to fall away. Force percent is 100. Force ejection is 250. As you see on the procedural, after I move the other screen, the force ejection is also 250. So these are relatively weak on force ejection. So what we want to engineer into the rocket design is anti-collision after ejection. So once the boosters eject and fall back to Kerbal, I don't want them to crash into our spacecraft. We can do this, we can manage this a couple different ways. So let's attach the big boys, and what we want to do is we're going to ensure that they are on the decoupler as best as we can. And again, this is more of a game mechanic. All right, so once we have them on, they look attached because they're separated from the actual spacecraft center fuselage. We're going to move them on the Z plane, and here we want to ensure that we're aligned with the bottom of the spacecraft, because what we don't want is an uneven seat on the landing pad, because we don't have a tower just yet to help us out. All right, so that looks good. All right, so with that, we need some aerodynamics, and we have the procedural nose cone and the aerodynamic nose cone. I believe these are the same part, but the procedural nose cone can look cooler, and I think they're the same cost. So 108, 240. Well, procedural's cheaper. Then we'll click on it and see, just kind of customize it a little bit. And perhaps we will just color it a little bit, make it look cool. Let's do that. All right, so coolness aside, we have our center of mass, our engine, our thrust, our center of mass, and our aerodynamics. That aerodynamics has got to be just below the center of mass. Otherwise, we will be unable to keep the spacecraft in the trajectory we want it to be. This fin, the AVT1 winglet, gives us a lot of aerodynamics, right? So we can put it pretty close to where we want. We make sure they're aligned. Our aerodynamics for the cost of the winglet, we only need 1. Make sure they're somewhat centered. And it looks like they might be. Let's toggle snap and do it one more time. So we'll toggle snap. There we go. That's much straighter. And building, just like in real life, you have to be precision. You have to be careful on how you build something in order to... You have to build just like in real life. Each precision piece has to be properly set in order for it to function properly. So let's look at our checklist. We want to make sure we stage the rocket properly. Okay, so the decouplers are going to happen, but they're not going to happen on the launch pad. So we want the boosters to launch first, and then we want the decouplers to decouple at the same time that we start our first stage in the center fuselage. The reason I want to start it right away, it'll give the opportunity for the thumpers to fall away, but also to keep forward momentum so the center fuselage spacecraft can continue moving up and get out of the way or get out of the path of collision with the two thumper rockets. Where we have these set, the thumper rocket's trajectory should go from top out, which will be a lot like releasing it from a bow, an arrow from a bow, hopefully. All right, so we have the next stage to release and fire at the same time, and the final stage. What we want to do here is we want to have the engine there definitely, but we want the decouple to happen a little bit later because we don't want. I'm sorry, I just did the opposite of what I want. The decouple first, and then we're going to wait for the engine. We don't want to start the engine immediately because we're going to time the last stage as we approach apoapsis in order to create or generate a trajectory that will give us a nice circular orbit and a controllable orbit. Once we do our spin for retrograde, or when we're ready, we'll disconnect the maneuvering stage into the and just have our final spacecraft coming back to Kerbal. All right, that looks good. Let's see what our Kerbal engineer says. He says we're at 1.93 on stage S6, which doesn't give me a lot of confidence. It should be, we got 42 seconds of burn. It looks like the delta V would be right around 1,000, and then we'll push past that 1,000. And S5, S4, and S2 on the engineer are giving us false data because until we're out of the we're going to be at different altitudes, and different altitudes will give us different thrust to weight ratios. So we're looking at this the bottom one. And as a project program manager, I'd be talking to my engineers, I'd be talking to my marketing people saying, hey, we're going to orbit. Let's get this out there. Let's advertise. Let's get the podcasts going. Let's invite VIPs. Let's get everything to where we need to be in order to gain as much renown and recognition out of it. Because in a commercial space program, we want customers to say, wow, they just launched somebody into orbit. They did it cost effectively and very safely. And just one final check. We want to see our tools down at the bottom to see the engineer. Where did it go? There it is. So the engineer's report, we're one part under the max that we can use. We're only at 31 tons, which is great. And then our height is only 12.5 meters, so we're within parameters to send this thing out to the launch pad. Since we have our name and our mission, we're going to hit save. And we're going to launch. This is for orbit, everyone. We don't cross our fingers with a space program, as one famous astronaut had noted. So we have our boosters firing first, then our first stage of the center fuselage, or the spacecraft. And then the second stage is looking good. Got the third stage and the fuel and final decoupling. All stages are green. Our Kerbal looks comfortable. All right, let's light this and see what we can do as far as piloting. All right, at about 8,000, I'll start to rotate. I may have to decouple our two thumpers prior to that. As a matter of fact, I'll start spinning now. Okay, we successfully separated without collision. Always a good thing. We'll start to move our spacecraft in the proper direction for orbit. And we'll continue to change trajectory as we get a little bit more surface speed. So far, so good. We'll look at our map real quick. So far, so good. Okay, and now we will engage our second engine and really keep an eye on fuel, because we're not exactly where we want to be as far as speed. So we'll start to change trajectory. And now we're at 63, 64. We're going to cut the engines in once we get to a decent altitude or a space altitude. And we'll wait. We might be falling a little too fast. We're falling too fast. Let's keep that speed up. Let's go a little bit longer and then cut them. And then go back to the map, because we're going to have to go toward the center of, or pitch it below the horizon. Let's go back to the map and start our engines up again right when we get about 3/4. So we will speed up just a tiny bit. Seems like we're keeping our 113, so that's good. And once we get to about here, we'll thrust, full thrust. We'll spread it out a little bit so we can get a good angle here. Keeping an eye on that fuel, because we need fuel to come back. All right, I think we did it. So we have 74,000 on our periapsis, and our apoapsis is 236,000 meters. So we should be able to do one full orbit, and without encountering the atmosphere and causing a drag. What we want to do in Kerbal, though, is we achieved orbit, so all we have to do is come back down safely. Now on this, we decided to pitch a little bit differently. So what I'm going to try to do is come in on a different biome. So when I set down, we'll set down and be able to take some readings. So I'll try to land center continent, maybe, since we already have an ocean. And just to give you a little more, in later missions, we'll be able to put somebody up in orbit, and then what we want to do is we'll go outside and go to the Space Center if we have to intercept another spacecraft or intercept an orbital fuel station or a satellite, or trade off astronauts in a space station we build. So all these things are going to come into effect. So what we can do is, once we understand everything, I don't want to observe the goo because I only get one shot at that without a scientist to reset the experiment. If I log the pressure, I can log it again. So we already took this on our last flight, so we're we won't need it. So what we'll do is we'll wait until we get into the atmosphere prior to taking some readings. All right, so once we do that, we want to get our retrograde. I'll take it, but I can always write over it. We want to go to our retrograde orbit, and there's a nice shot of the center of the galaxy behind our spacecraft with the moon. That's our next journey. We'll be cresting soon, watching the sun. The sunset of Kerbal behind the nice long curvature. And we'll speed it up just a little bit. Coming on the dark side of the planet. Beautiful. Sunset from space. What I wouldn't give to do that. Here we go. All right, so we had our sunset. We're on the dark side of the planet. We're going to flip the capsule to a retrograde fire. Now, as we go around the orbit of the planet, that retrograde trajectory will change. I'm going to go back to the map, and I'm going to speed us up just a little bit because I do want to get one orbit out of it. Let's see what happens. Beautiful. All right, so we got one orbit out of it. And what I want to do now is speed it up because we're going to be burning toward the day side of the planet. Now here, if I had enough fuel, I would be able to change our orbit to more of a polar orbit. This is an offset equatorial orbit, which isn't too bad. And as we start getting toward that, is we're going to come down. Let's see where we are. Okay, here we are. So I'll light it a little bit. And as you'll see, we are going to land in the mountains right there. So I think that's good. Although our descent is very angled. It's going to be a long, frictionful burn. Maybe we can cut a little bit more. That's a little bit better. And I think we're still coming down in a different biome, which is part of our... All right, so since we are coming down in the mountains, I am going to set our parachute for 4,000 meters. Actually, let's go 3,000 meters. The pressure should still open up our parachute at the appropriate time, especially if we're over the mountains. And now, as we start our descent, I just have to keep the tail of the spacecraft at the retrograde reticule. So I'm going to speed it up just a little bit to get to that point. As you can see, we're slowing down a little bit, which is even better. And as we start to head down, I will probably let loose a little bit more fuel. Let's see if we can align. No, we won't until we start to fall. What I need to do now is eject the fuel. I'm going to decouple manually. So the engine should fall away. Now we have a little bit more control over the capsule. And it should fall past us. But we're going to keep that in the reticule. We do have a lot of speed built up. The friction will help us. The ablator is fine. We knew we'd take some heat shield damage as we entered. We're slowing down really nice. I'm gonna center up again. We started taking some heat damage there. All right. Successful through the atmosphere. I'm gonna release the parachute. It won't release until we get down to the speed of 250 or so. Oh, a little bit higher. So at this point, the drag will take us to the 250. And I'll speed up time as we are on the dark side of the planet. Although, what a night sky. And there, in the distance, 10.6 kilometers away, is our engine. That's our debris from Loki 1. And here we come. And at 33,000 feet, our parachute will deploy. And we have a full deployed parachute. And let's see where we land. This is the dangerous part, because if we land on a hill, we'll actually roll until we stop, and that could cause damage. So, our fall is at 7 meters a second. That sounded like our engine just landing as well. We missed the mountains by quite a bit. We're at our fastest warp. In future missions, when we start to attempt landing on dark sides of planets, we will be having lights on our cockpits, and allowing us to judge the distance to the surface. Looks like we might be a little bit above sea level here. Our parachute is actually diminished us in speed even more. And we should be close to ground. Dark side. There we are. We did roll. We should come to a stop soon. Luckily we have the service bay, so we're not gonna roll straight. We'll open the service bay to stop us. And we'll do a barometric pressure, which we will recover. We'll do a temperature, which will recover. We'll do a scientific goo experiment, because we can. And I think that's all we can do. Yeah, we don't get, unfortunately, we don't get science for every thermometer we have. That would be awesome. I'd be loading it up. And then once we have all our data, we'll recover the vessel. Oh, I forgot to take a crew report. That's okay. We'll be landing there anyway in a future mission, I'm sure. All right, so with that, we have, as you can see, the second temperature scan went to 0, so we don't get any. So you only get them counted once. 19 science earned. We got 60 for the mission, or total science 60. We got some funds back from the rocket, and we did get 1 experience gained for Commander Becker. Awesome. So at this point in time, thanks for listening. And in the future, we're going to look at our science. We're going to run a real simple mission on the next one, which is just a coupling. And then we'll look for more missions for orbiting spacecraft. And of course, our mission as a commercial space agency is to do amazing things, inspire not only young people, but even older people who grew up in the space race, challenging the norms of commercial space flight, not only for industry, but for leisure. We're going to do all these things on Earth and in Kerbal. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We did orbit. What a great achievement. We're going to celebrate a little bit. The Kerbals are going to get some leave time. And we will be here next week to guide you through a little bit more. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you think this content is worthy of that. And a share is always nice, especially for those program managers who want to have a fun time learning. As always, have fun out there and keep looking up.